All right, you guys, welcome to this live webinar on producing music in Ableton Live. Specifically, I'm going to be showing you how this track was put together, the Ranjheya track. Feel free to drop any questions in Facebook here. Okay, cool. Now I'm seeing it. Welcome. All right. It's going to be a slight delay from my feed and from what I see in Facebook, but I guess that's how it's set up. So this is going to be an hour long, so I want to try and get in as much as I can. But yeah, I'll keep an eye on the questions here. Sumit is going to be sending me those questions just in case I miss those. So feel free to ask any question as I'm explaining stuff, and I'll definitely get to as many questions as possible. So the idea here is I'm going to be showing you my work in progress. So okay. Firstly, so Sumit asked me to do this. He sent me everybody's versions. I heard everybody's songs. It was amazing to hear your versions, fantastic remixes that you did. A lot of these are I would say full-on compositions that you guys have put together, beautiful arrangements. In fact, I would say my idea was kind of inspired by one of those. I'm not sure who it was specifically. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I kind of started off mine by listening to one of your remixes, and then I got an idea, and then I built on that. So what I tried to do was to have this session. So I'm working in Ableton Live here. For those of you who are new to Ableton Live, don't worry too much about it. I'm just going to generally focus on production techniques, not so much on specifics in ADAW. So where's this session here? I'm looking at. There you go. Apologize for the spelling. I know that's that's the wrong spelling. So I have different versions as I was building, because the idea was to do this webinar. So the idea was to work on the track a little and then save it, and then work on it a little bit more, save it. So I kind of forced myself to keep saving versions as I kept adding on to the production. So we'll kind of go through these versions towards the tail end. All these are very minor edits, but I think the first few had a lot of significant changes. So that's what I have there. Cool. So I'll open up the very first one here. Won't save this. I think this was the final one. And you guys have access to this session. So feel free to check it out. Probably not right now because it'll be hard for you to open up this. It's a pretty big session. There's a lot of stuff happening there. So maybe after the webinar is over, you can go back and look at the session if you have Ableton Live, that is. So this is the very first version I have here. It's 29 tracks or so. It's quite big. So let me talk a bit about how I work. I will, if it's okay, this is kind of like a remix, right? So we have the vocal stems and we're supposed to create an entire arrangement or remix out of it. So I brought in the vocals. I listened to some of well, there was no original, so I just was referring to some of the other remixes, and I was listening to chord progressions and the basic structure. So that was the main goal: listen to the basic structure and find out like what are the basic chords of the song. So I listened to it, and then I kind of change it up a little bit. So this, you can see here, I have the verse laid out. And I had a little trouble getting the tempo as well because there was no information on the tempo from the track, but then did a little bit of messing around and I found it was working at 67 BPM. So here's the vocal track. I put some chords right below it. Like I think I started with the piano and then I kind of built on it and I did some other stuff here. So let's listen to this first section over here. So this is the voice. And also, yeah, we were looking at different versions of the track with the female vocal and the male vocal, playing around with that. Eventually, obviously, we went with the female vocal. So this is the vocal with the piano. Let's just hear the vocal and the piano. मेरे सोनिए सोनिए मेरे इश्क का फसाना हो गया हाय मैं दीवाना हो गया. Right, so that's the basic chord progression. Always good to start on a basic instrument like a piano like this, so you kind of can hear the chords, and it's a bit soft right now, but hear the harmony clearly and see if it gels well with the vocal part. If there any note that sounds a bit odd, usually on a piano, it can be kind of obvious, or even like a sawtooth, like a plain sawtooth, if you want to use a synthesizer. So I had that, then I decided, oh, I also kind of started off with the alaps. I thought, okay, we can have some alap opening, but I don't think I had anything. Yeah, so, oh, okay, I had this. So yeah, this is very typical, opening where you just have the drone and then the voice comes in. I did put some strings, as you heard here. These strings, what's happening? I think this is coming from Contact. This is a library. Oliver Arnolds, this composer, he's done some libraries for native instruments and he has some independent ones. So this is one of them. Yeah, this is from, I think this company, is that the British company Spitfire? Yeah, I think this is from Spitfire Audio. But he's a pretty well-known composer. He's done a lot of stuff for a lot of different companies. So definitely worth checking out. So this is his string library here that I'm using. I like this one because there's a lot of movement. Unlike a typical string library, you just have the notes. If sustained notes is just holding down the note. In this particular library, he's added like very interesting, modulations on specific instruments and stuff like that. So that gives it some life. Even though you're just holding down a few chords, it's still kind of there's some movement in there. So I like that as a basis. But yeah, that was essentially it. Just some chords, just playing around with the chords and making sure it works well with the voice. I think we have some plucky thing. Yeah, I added this pluck thing here right after. Yeah, so this was, I think, the part that was there right till the end. Usually we'll have some initial ideas. They kind of don't make it till the end because if they, feel like it's not quite working, doesn't sound that good, so I'll swap it out with something a bit better. But this worked pretty well. So it's so what's happening here? If you look at the notes, right? So this is Ableton Live's MIDI view. We're looking at the chord progression. We're clearly not hearing this though. You can hear it's repeating because I have an arpeggiator on this particular track, and the arpeggiator is set to chord trigger. So it triggers the entire chord, in that particular rhythm, let's say a 16th note over here. Right. Sure, you could just repeat the chord again and again, but this kind of saves some time because essentially what I did was I had the chords from the piano, I just copied it over, and I wanted to create that rhythmic pluck effect. So instead of chopping up the notes and repeating, copy pasting, I just decided let's just use the arpeggiator. I'm using Serum here. It's very, very popular wavetable synth these days, but it's essentially, a sawtooth pluck. Well, this is some weird shape here. But two oscillators, a lot of unison detuning. Is there? Yeah, they're both. The second oscillator is slightly out of tune, and then there's a filter. It's going through. I think in the later versions I did change. This is not a preset. I haven't saved this, so I think in a later version you might see this looks a bit different. This was just the initial idea. I quickly, put this together because I needed like a plucky sound. So oscillator going through a low pass filter with a pluck. I think is it an LFO? No, it's probably envelope 2. Yeah, envelope 2 here is modulating this filter cutoff. It's a good starting sound. I think eventually I added some noise and added the sub oscillator as well. So that was the initial chord progression. Once I was happy with that, I figured, all right, let's work on the drop. And a lot of people like to work like this. They'll work on the main section of the song, like the core part of the song, and then kind of work around it, right? As opposed to working from the beginning, like your intro, verse, and then your chorus or drop or whatever. So I tend to also do that sometimes where I just work on the middle, the main drop section. But I did do the chords first just so I have an idea what I'm going to have, what the the drop is going to sound like, because you don't want to just work on the drop and then go back to the verse and realize it has a totally different sound, totally different chord progression. So after having the verse, I figured, all right, good time to work on the drop. And this is what we have here. Let's listen to it. I hear nothing. Oh, because I've soloed this. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you listen to the final version, there's a lot more happening. The sound's a lot more sparse, but the basic idea is there. I believe let's talk a bit about the drums. So since we have it right from the beginning here. So I tend to do this a lot where I'm not MIDI sequencing the drum parts. So it's all basically just audio. I just drag the audio in, especially if it's a very straightforward, beat. I like seeing that waveform, and if anything needs to be adjusted, like the volume, I can just double click this little clip here, and you can see I've already done that, adjusting the volume, stuff like that. So that's the kick. Let's see if there's any processing. So the kick, and then a little bit of saturation to beef it up a bit. The hi-hats I tend to do MIDI sequencing just because, doing really fine hits like this can be a bit hard to do it in audio. And then you can add groove and, swing and all that stuff in MIDI, which you can't really do in the audio level. So some layers in terms of the clap. So there's a clap sound here. There's a little, that wasn't really a clap, so it sounds like a snare. That's a snap. Coin, right? So I like to do this, just add random, sound effects in there. So you can see it's a longer sample. It's found. You probably might want to start it over here. But actually, I purposely, I think, started a bit earlier. So the actual transient, if that is a transient, happens a bit later. So not all peaks happen exactly at the same time. So that's one thing I tend to make sure. If I have multiple things happening, as you can see here, right? So you can see this coin crunch is happening earlier, the snap is happening a bit late, and then the clap is spot on, right on the downbeat. So overall, you kind of get this, flammy type of effect, which, kind of works pretty well. If you have them all the transient hitting at the exact same time, it can be a bit hard to mix as well. So nice to kind of offset them just a wee bit. What else? Okay, I guess let's talk about this intro. So I figured this is kind of done a lot in Indian music, right? A very common thing. So I figured instead of doing that, why not replace this idea of a drone with totally different sounds? And I had this library for post-production for like some film projects where you just have sounds of ocean and stuff like that. So that's what I have over here. Yeah, so that kind of became a replacement for the drone. I don't know if I still had the drone in the final version or I removed it completely. It might be there, but really soft in the mix. And then, of course, typical standard noise sweeps and stuff like that. And I didn't have to really do that on these samples because they naturally had the waves. The ocean waves naturally had that dynamics in them, so I kind of made sure to position that waveform so that peak happens exactly where I want it to happen. Like over here, you can see there's a nice clear-cut peak there, and put a nice fade in and fade out, so we see all that. If you look at fades here, am I in automation? Yeah, I'm in automation. So these are all the fades.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what's happening in the background. And these are elements typically you save for later, but for me to help my drop to really feel it, I want that all that stuff happening right before. So I quickly put that together and then focus on the drop. Now the drop here, at least the vocal elements are kind of fun and probably worth talking about.
Yeah.
I like that. So you can see it's mostly mono tracks, but there's a stereo audio clip inside there. So it's pretty straightforward. What I would do is just take the voice, chop it up into tiny segments, and then just play with the transpose. Or you can see here, this is transpose up an octave. You saw it. Right, that was the original one. So a lot of resampling and messing with the pitch and putting in. So here I still have it in the sampler.
Yeah.
Right, so I took that vocal performance. This is the entire vocal, what do you call it, stem, and I just picked a particular position. And I guess if you can play this right now. And then just find little segments that would work well, make sure that it's in the right key, and put it all together. Yeah, so that was the main idea that I was going with. There's another one here. So like pitched really low. So this is actually, I think it's the female voice. Oh no, it's the male voice. But yeah, when you pitch it down, you get that very deep, dark, Darth Vader-like effect. And it works pretty well. What's happening here? So again, putting that instrument into a sampler here and then just playing it, in any particular way. Just finding notes that would, create some kind of a melodic phrase. So it can be a bit tricky because you're just working at one small section, and then you kind of have to kind of zoom out and then play back the whole thing and see if it kind of creates a phrase. So you still want some kind of a melodic phrase, but you're creating it in a kind of unconventional way. You're playing some notes, you just have like this one snippet where you pitch things up or down and put it all together, and hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's move. I don't think there's much here. I think we've talked about this stuff here. Okay, I do have a bass part. Maybe we can talk about this. Yeah, I should probably have done more save as, but yeah, it's all in that very first session. Because once ideas start coming in, it's kind of hard to stop. Right? You kind of just go for the ideas, just let it, just put it down. Make sure to put it down. So this is the bass part. I'm using Monarch. I like using Monarch. It has that classic mini Moog, analog sound. So that's the main bass part, and then I layered that with a sub bass, which hopefully you guys, if you're using headphones, full range speakers, you should be able to hear this. It's basically a sub sine wave with a little bit of saturation to distort it a little bit. And that's the bass part. All right, let's move on to, I don't think I have anything here. I was just playing with the original vocal stems. Let's move on to the next version, see what else I added. 1.2. Don't save this. And all this is in that session that you'll get from Sumit, all the different versions. If you don't have those plugins, you may not hear, you may not be able to load those particular sounds. But the very last session, I kind of rendered all the third-party plugins that should play back. All right, so here it's a bit more organized, the different parts. All right, so there's a question on which VST is being used for the bass. I think, yeah, I'm getting these questions a bit late. The bass, as I mentioned earlier, is, I can do it again. So Monarch is this plugin made by Native Instruments. We still have it here. So this is the bass. It's combined into like a group over here. This is the main bass part. You can hear now it sounds a bit different. So as I keep building, I'll keep tweaking these sounds. So this is Monarch. It's a 3-oscillator monophonic synth. It's basically like a software recreation of the classic mini Moog synth. So it sounds a bit gritty because I added this noise layer. Without the noise, doesn't have that feel. So that was the bass from Native Instruments Monarch, and then that's the same operators. So this is basically just a sine wave. This is an FM synth engine, but I'm not using any FM synthesis here. I'm just using a single oscillator set to a sine wave. Well, okay, I'm using a wee bit of FM, just a little bit of FM at the same pitch. So I don't want to go deep into FM right now, but it's essentially a sine wave with a slightly different curve. There's another question here. Can you elaborate on drones? So yeah, I guess I still have this here. So drone is basically, so in a song, in any song, you may have, or you definitely should have like a specific key to the song. It could be in C, it could be in G, it could be in a major key, it could be in a minor key. So the drone usually will emphasize that fundamental, the key. So this drone kind of does that. So it's repeating the same note. It may repeat the fifth, which is also usable in most keys. So that drone kind of emphasizes the key of the song. And then on top, if you have chord changes happening, it'll still still kind of work. Now, usually in traditional Indian music, there is this concept of key change. As far as I know, doesn't really happen. It's usually just one key throughout the whole piece. But in Western music, the key does change. Oh, sorry, not the key, but the chords do change. So but yeah, as long as the drone is in the main key, let's say if the song is in C major, if your drone is in C, it should still work. So that's the drone, but I kind of emphasize that with strings. But the strings technically are not really droning because they are playing the cards. If you listen to this again. Yeah, so not traditionally a drone, but it's kind of drone-like because it's just those sustained notes and just few notes here there are kind of moving. So it's mostly like a drone. And then yeah, emphasizing all this, we're just giving like kind of a texture with the ocean sounds here. All right, cool. I'm gonna move on. So there's a question, I believe, from the singer who's singing the song. Can you elaborate how to make that traditional house synth pluck? So that's a very common sound that you'll hear a lot, and it's also probably the easiest sound to make. But let me show you. I call it, and it is kind of called the dead mouse pluck. If you listen to Dead Mouse's music, he pretty much uses this sound all the time. All right, so let's reset this. Go to menu. I'll say initialize preset. So if you solo this, all right, the arpeggiator is running. I'll just turn that off right now. By the way, this is a good way to also kind of listen to your chord progression with your voice. When you hear that nice, rich, buzzy sawtooth, it'll emphasize the harmony really well. All right, so the pluck. The most basic element of the pluck is you need some kind of harmonically rich waveform, like a sawtooth. That would be ideal, and then run that to any kind of a low-pass filter. So in Serum, we have a bunch of different filters. We have 4 different low-pass filters. The difference is mainly in the slope, like how steep the filtering is. So here it's not so steep at 12 dB per octave. At 24, it's a lot more steep. Both work totally fine. The 24 dB per octave slope will be a bit snappier. So let's hear this. All right, so you can hear as I modulate that cutoff, that changes the overall brightness of the sound. So I want to basically modulate this with an envelope. We have 3 envelopes here. In Serum, this first ADSR envelope is kind of assigned to control the volume or amplitude of the sound, but we have a second one and a third one, so we can use those to do whatever we want. So I want to create that pluck shape. The pluck shape is basically no attack, no sustain, and a little bit of decay. Yeah, so that's the shape I have, and you can play around with the decay base. That can be a subjective thing based on your taste. Now I'm going to bring the cutoff all the way down, and this little arc that you see here, this, I mean, as long as you're in Serum or in Native Instruments Massive, they both are very similar. It basically works like this. So this arc here represents how much the envelope is going to modulate that cutoff parameter, and I can click and drag here to adjust that, right? And this will also change the sound. You can see it's a very, very mellow. Let's turn on the arpeggiator now. If I want that plucky, and when it's at its lowest, if I want it to be a bit brighter, I'll increase the modulation depth a bit more. See, that's a bit brighter now. And that's it. That's essentially the fundamentals of that plug sound. To make it a bit nicer, you can add some unison. Unison is basically the same oscillator, but additional copies of it. So let's say I have 4 copies of it, and now I can change, detune them basically. So if they're all exactly the same pitch, it's just going to be change in volume. But if they're slightly out of tune, you get that nice chorusing effect. And on this plugin, on Serum, it also widens those voices. So you can see here those lines represent the voices, and left to right is your panning. So now I'm making it nice and wide. If it's too much, you can hear it sounds out of tune. So you got to find that nice sweet spot. And yeah, there you go. That's basically that famous house or dead mouse plug. More questions? Did the plug thing? How can we decide to put on fades on specific paths? So fades, it's just subjective. There's no, you have to put a fade on this or put a fade on the other thing. So okay, let's talk about fades with this part here. Right, so I just wanted that effect to gradually kick in, because if I don't, I mean, the sample already has a natural fade. If we zoom in a bit more here, it has that fade anyway, but I want to exaggerate it, so I added that additional fade. Right, so it starts softer and then it gradually kicks in. Let's look at this one here. This one also same, I guess. So, oh, look at this fade out here. So if I don't add that fade out, it kind of abruptly ends, right? I mean, there is reverb on the track, I think on the group here. But if I turn off the reverb, it'll be very abrupt. If we play it from here. Right, that's, unless you specifically want an abrupt end, you generally want to add a little fade. So I'm going to zoom in a bit here. So add a little fade so it's more natural. Yeah, so it's a bit smooth. So that's the idea with fades. Any audio you're recording, it's always nice to add a little bit of fade in or fade out, again, depending on the context. Even just a wee bit, even if you don't want to create a dramatic effect, just a wee bit at the beginning to avoid any clicks and pops and stuff like that, it's a good idea. If I don't have a soundproof room, should I go for a pair of monitors, or monitoring headphones would be a better choice in that case? Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a good room to monitor stuff, it's always best to just spend that money, on headphones. You won't have to spend that much money on headphones, because you can get really good pair of monitoring headphones for a lot less than buying really good speakers and soundproofing your room, because that'll cost a lot more. So absolutely. Seems like your wife is online. Yeah, she is online as well. All right. What else? Okay, I think for this version, do we look at anything different here? Basses, plugs, vocal edits. Let's play back from this section here. So as you can hear, this is version 1.2, and I already pretty much have the entire drop section, because that's usually what I start with, as I mentioned, right? Get the chord progression done, and then just start working on the main essence of the song, and then do all the other things, because the other things will come easily once you have the core of the song. So that's, as you can hear here now, all the vocal edits are pretty much like the final track. Let's open this up. Oh yeah, let's talk about this. So I think in 1.2 I figured right after the drop I wanted to go into this instrumental section, and it's that same synth here. that is just playing a little melody. Right, so once you load it, so Ableton is great for this. Just drop a sample in here, select the little segment that you want to use as your instrument, loop it. So when you hold a note, right, it's just looping that little segment there. Very important to check the tuning. So if I'm playing C right now, you can see I have a tuner, so that's showing me that it is a C, but then that's because I tuned it. You can see here I'm transposing and detuning stuff to ensure that, you know, when I play a C, I hear a C. Because otherwise, if I don't do that, when I'm playing a C, it could be a different note, and then when I play a melodic line in the key of the song, it's not going to match the song. So very important, when you take these random samples, make sure it's tuned to the correct key. Cool, so that's what's happening there. Let's go ahead, move on, check out another version. So that's 1.2. Let's go to the third one here. Don't save. All right, so there's a question about risers. I have a certain riser in mind that I wanted to create using a synth. It's the very first riser using the song Allah Du Hai Hai from Race 3. This might be out of context. I really want to create that riser. Okay, I have no idea what that song is, but we can always check it out. So I'm just going to go here, search for that song. So ALLAHDUHAI. Oh, there you go. Good. Race 3. Race 3. All right, let's find out what's happening in this riser. Salman Khan. Yeah, I know him. Know of him. Okay, so if it was that opening, there's two elements there, which is just this instrument that's, you know, gradually getting faster. And then there's this sound effect. Yeah, I've done this before. This is more like a sound effect, not really a riser. So let's see. Okay, see if I can create this right now. So I'm hearing pitch change and I'm hearing amplitude change. So essentially, so what I'll do is it'll take a while to create the exact same thing, but I'll show you the concept behind it. So and then you can try this out yourself. So let's just take this instrument I was playing with right now. No, not that one. What was the other one? In the drop, the voice. All right, let's say this one. So if I want to create that pitch change, so you can just do a pitch. Right? Now on this particular sampler, the pitch doesn't go down as much, but if I switch to a fancier sampler, in here, I believe I can change that pitch range. So I can go down 24 semitones. So when I play a note, I can do that. You can even automate the pitch, and you know you can play around with that. So right, so that's how I could do a pitch change. And then next for the gating effect. So if you're using Ableton Live, the auto pan works great for gating because you can crank up the amount. Right now it's going to do left and right panning. I don't know if this will translate into Facebook Live, but that's what's happening here. But if I change the phase, now both left and right are basically moving at the same time, so we'll get this auto tremolo effect. So let's make that a bit faster. And now if I do the pitch change, so imagine as I'm changing pitch, if I also change the rate at the same time. Let's see if I can do this. I'll MIDI map the rate dial to the pitch bend dial. Oh, it does work. Cool. So now, while I'm doing pitch bend, I'm also doing gate speed. Except the range is all over the place. So let me set that to a nicer range here. So let's say minimum not so low and maximum not so high there. Okay, I can't test it out while we're still in this mode. Actually, I want it to go opposite, right? So I want the minimum to be higher and maximum to be lower. So let's try something like that. whatever, you can kind of play around and create something like that. But obviously the sound in that track is not an actual voice. It's like some kind of a metallic texture. You can take like a cymbal sound or something like that. All right, cool. Other questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think you've answered that yourself. So let's check out other parts here in the track. Let's check out the instrumental section here. Something's happening. Maybe I messed it up, so because of all this mapping. So I'm just going to reload this version. Don't save. So there's strings here to fill up that background. Again, same chords. The chords I think doesn't change throughout the song. There's a little bit of an ARP type deal happening here. So I'm using FM8, which is another synth from Native Instruments. Primarily, I'm using it for the talk wah effect. So it kind of has this vocalized formant effect. You can see I'm modulating the mouth and the size here. Right, that was creating a nice effect. So I have that. The piano is still playing the chords. And yeah, that's that section. Yeah, so this one we're still using the male voice. I think rest of it is pretty much the same. The drop I just copied and pasted it over here. I should probably talk about in the drop section, the synth in the drop section, the wobble synth part here. So this also is kind of I like what I did here. It's a nice little section. So that movement, a lot of people do this with LFOs and envelopes, but I just wanted a very specific movement, so I just did it in automation. So if you switch over to automation mode, it's basically filter cutoff. Filter cutoff is probably the one parameter that's modulated the most on synths. So this is a similar sound to the previous one I just showed you how to make, but instead of doing a pluck, I have no modulation on the cutoff, but I'm just doing the automation here. So technically, you can see here, this could be an envelope shape. Like if you zoom into this one, let's say this one over here, this could be an envelope and this could be a different envelope. So I wanted to change every time. That's why it didn't make sense for me to use an envelope, because an envelope will always stay the same. So I decided to do it in automation. It's a sawtooth type shape here, like a little kind of pulse shape, some unison on, some noise, sub-oscillator to kind of make it nice and full. The sub-oscillator is at the same pitch as the main oscillator, so it doesn't, it's not really a sub-oscillator, it's just re-emphasizing the main oscillator because I have another bass section, so I don't want it to clash. That's also very important to do. As you're producing, you want to make sure that these parts you're adding, they all work together, as opposed to waiting till the end when you have to mix and then now you have to fix your parts. So that can be a bit difficult. I think there's another question here. Can you talk about exponential rhythms in your song? All right, so that was from a different song, the exponential rhythm stuff. So what I'll do is, so that I didn't, I mean, this kind of has a bit of that, and you'll hear that in productions, in my productions in general overall. So what I'll do is I'll tell Sumit to send you like a video. I have some videos that I made where it just explain those concepts. But similar to what we're having in the drop here, I'm not specifically creating. So yeah, I'm not really doing a rhythm. I'm just doing melodic phrases, and they're very straight. The rhythm is very straight. But if I want to make this a bit more rhythmic and more interesting, I could zoom in here, kind of start chopping up the audio. So just select, am I in automation? Yeah, sorry. So just select portions of the audio and start cutting it up. And you can kind of. So that one sounds weird, so maybe move that there. We get rid of that. So just by looking at this phrase here with the metronome, it kind of creates a nice rhythm. And then you can kind of fine tune it, add a little bit of fades and stuff, zoom in a lot, add some fades, change pitch, and select transpose. Right. I like also doing reverse. When it's this small, I guess reverse is not going to make that much of a difference. Yeah, not doesn't sound that different. But that's essentially the idea, right? So you take a little any sample, chop it up, and then kind of create your own specific rhythm. If it needs to be more exponential, there are other specific techniques where you kind of start off fast and you gradually become slower. You can do it manually. At one point I used to do it manually. So let's just do it with one. I have this one snippet here. I wanted to create a rhythm with this. So what I could do is copy, paste right next to each other. And as I am basically option dragging, I'll make sure that the gap between every sample is exponentially getting wider, right? So let's drag that more. And then eventually you want it to fall on, so let's say maybe that one there could fall here. So it kind of implies some kind of, let's see, hopefully that works. I'll turn off the metronome. Yeah, so something like that. In fact, over here we could go even faster. So I'll make this really tiny, option drag. Let's put a few more in here. Let's see how that sounds. Yeah, so that's basically the idea. And those last ones can be a bit longer as well, since there's a lot more space. And the first few ones, since they're so short, you need to make sure that they are nice and plucky and very, transient-ish. And the longer ones can be longer. Right, so that's the idea. But you gotta, this was just randomly done it really quickly, but you need to spend some time on it, make sure it's like rhythmically accurate, and it works well with your drum progression, your rhythm section, basically. Let's move on to another version here. I think by this point I'm kind of, don't save, pretty much done with the entire arrangement. It's taking a while to load. All right, there we go. All right, so by version 1.4, I decided to add markers, and that helps, especially when you're showing off your track to other people, so then they know where everything is. So I organize it a bit. The drums are a bit more full, I guess. So I was talking about how the drums is mostly just samples, but hi-hat I'll tend to keep in MIDI just because I want to do, this is not that fine. I guess I could have done it in audio as well, but just because it's easier to keep this in MIDI. And that whole, going back to that exponential rhythm thing, you can also do it with MIDI. I was doing it with audio earlier, which is slightly more complicated. With MIDI, it'll be even easier. So I did add another, I think in the instrumental section, I added some voices. I guess not yet. So yeah, so this version is mainly I organized the whole part. I added these markers. I think we added the voice here. Let's check out the next one after this. I know I added some vocals in the instrumental section here. right. Okay, so okay, it's still not here. Okay, maybe in another version. I have a new instrument here though. Oh yeah, I made this thing in Contact, which if you listen carefully, it's kind of morphing through. Like I basically took in Contact, you have different instruments. So what I took the oud, the kalimba, the harp, the kora, the marimba, all these different ethnic / Western, European instruments, and I created this morph thing in here. So it's kind of gradually morphing from one instrument texture to another. That kind of created a nice effect. It sounds nice in isolation, but in the track, because it's so busy, you can't really hear it. So I just figured, okay, this is going to be a background texture. Because there's strings, there's this FM ARP thing we already heard of. And there's also that vocal, this part thing over here. So it's a bit hard for that little one segment to stick out a bit more. Typically what I would do is I'll make other parts softer if I really want to feature it, but I realize it's kind of plucky and thin, this part here. And it's too much change to be like an upfront element in this kind of a song, so I figured let's just keep it as a background element. It doesn't have to be in the foreground. Let's move forward here, 1.6, see what's happening here. Don't save. We're almost at the end here, so feel free to bring in those questions. All right, these sessions take a bit longer to open because I have these Contact sample libraries running, the strings and that morph instrument. But otherwise, Ableton 10 does load up pretty quickly. So now we have the female vocal in here. Oh, here's that. I think this is one of the libraries from Crypto Cipher. So it's just been warped to work with this particular tempo, and key is not a problem because it's just basically vocal percussion. And you hear as we move forward, we're in version 1.6 now, the drums are getting a bit more emphasized. So I'm also mixing as I go along. I'm adding new parts, I'm going back and revisiting other parts and fine-tuning things, making sure everything sounds good.
Yeah.
Then there was this section, was kind of like the dancey section. Yeah, it's not quite finished yet, so kind of wanted to create that housey vibe over here, and you have that very typical hollow, glassy house bass part, which I can't find. Is it in here in the lows? Yeah, so there's a third part here. I guess it would be the FM8 bass. And also the rhythm is different. I did change up the rhythm in the final version, and I think also change up the notes a bit there. Let's move on to the next one, see if we have the finalized version of that. Okay, let's go to the bridge section here. Yeah, so we also have the main alap thing that comes back in over here. So the alap happens at the beginning and then right at the end again for this bridge section, and the outro is back to the main drop. So in here, yeah, so I made that. So I felt like the FM bass was a bit boring because it's just repeating the same rhythm that's already there. We've heard it many times, so I figured let's just make it a bit more exciting. So you can see here, this bass is slightly different from these other two basses. And that's okay because it's a high bass part, so it's fine that it's different from the lower bass parts. In fact, this bass part it is playing the same, as you can see from the notes there. Except the sub bass, right? So that kind of movement won't translate well on sub basses, so I decided not to do it on the sub bass. And another thing you'll hear, there's some more synths now in the drop. So that's kind of like my thing. I like to do that, adding those 8-bit style video game, retro video game type sounds. Let's see where those are coming from. There's a wobble synth. We already heard this one. And there's some sidechain compression on it now. There's a scratch I have here. Right, so it kind of fills up the section here because it's kind of halftime. There's a lot of space, so there's space to add these. These are very thin, blippy sounds, so you don't have to do much to make it cut through a mix. We did do a minor change, I think over here. There's just a bar of 2/4 just to create a pause.
Yeah.
Let's create that kind of, because it gets a bit intense here. You're kind of peaking over here. The drums are getting a bit more intense. It's building up.
Yeah.
So just take it away for a brief moment and then go back to a familiar section of the song, as opposed to just going right into it directly. Also, because this is a lot more intense, and going from an intense section into a halftime section might bring the energy down a bit, and that might not be good for a song. Generally, as you're going forward in the song, you want the energy to keep rising. But if you have a very dramatic pause like this, it helps.
Yeah.
To introduce the next section. So that was the idea behind that. Yeah, that's pretty, I think we did a similar thing in the opening as well. Maybe not this. Let's jump right ahead. So we're pretty much at the end. These last few, it's mainly mixes, minor things here and there. I'll open 2.0. Look at a few more questions coming in here now. So the question on the morph instrument, and it is in bass, sub bass design. All right. So the morph instrument, I plan to, did I do it? I haven't done it yet. So I plan to do a video on that on YouTube. I was waiting, so I was working with Contact 6 for a while, but it was still under, wasn't released yet officially. And then when it was released, I just didn't get time to do a video for it. So I'll put a video out on YouTube on my channel that shows the whole process of creating that morph instrument. It's pretty cool. You can just take any 5 or 6 different instruments and you can kind of morph from one to another. And you get very interesting results. So it's kind of a long process. I won't be able to cover that in a few minutes here. So I'll send a link to Sumit when it's out and you guys can check that out. Yeah, and that's kind of a nice technique. It's a great sound design technique as well. All right, so while we are here, so this is pretty much the entire song. You can see everything is here. There's a flute. Oh, I didn't know there was a flute part here. Oh, I know what this is. This is... Yeah, this is going back to that whole idea of the drone. We were talking about what is drone and all that stuff. So it's essentially playing the root note on a flute instrument. This is a pretty cool. I'll show you. This is I don't know why I converted to audio. Probably was taking up a lot of CPU. But let's look at this instrument. If you guys have Reactor, there's a very nice instrument in here. Let's go into audio units. Just search for it. Reactor. It doesn't matter if you're on 6 or 5. This has been around for a long time. So in both versions. In Reactor, if you go into synthesizers, if you scroll down here, there's one called Steam Pipe 2. So this is the instrument I use, and the very first preset is basically a flute preset. This is a physical modeling instrument, and if I just play this instrument here, solo it. So they mapped that texture or the timbre to the mod wheel. So you notice I'm just moving the mod wheel. If you keep your eye over here on the mod wheel parameter. Pretty nice instrument. Sounds very realistic as well. Has that Japanese shakuhachi kind of a sound. So that's what I use for this flute section here. Yeah, that's pretty much it. See if there's anything else I'm leaving out. So the question about the bass, sub bass. So so your sub bass is nothing much to design. It's just typically it should be a sine wave or a triangle at most. So here I have a sine wave. But yeah, because of the saturation and because a little bit of FM, it's no longer a sine wave. It's just slightly, it has a little bit more harmonics. But your sub bass should be pretty much that, and it should be obviously lower than the main bass part. But your main bass part, it totally depends on the style of music you're going for. I like using Monarch. Um, Again, like I said, it's a great monosynth. It mimics or it emulates that classic hardware analog synth from Moog. Um, yeah, so in terms of actual design process, I would say the house pluck sound that I showed you guys earlier, I would follow the same process. So maybe a sawtooth or a square. Square works pretty well for basses as well. And then run it through a filter, bring the cutoff all the way down. You can see I've done this here as well. The contour is the envelope modulation, and this is the shape of the filter envelope. There's a little bit of attack just to soften it up, but again, you can have no attack, no sustain, and a little bit of decay, and create that plucky effect on your bass. So that would be like a good starting point for bass sounds. Try square waves. I like square waves with a filter, a low pass filter for bass parts. Works pretty well, even though I didn't do it on this track. It was a triangle there. Process, there's many questions about that Slit Eye song. So process in arranging crazy glitchy stuff as in the song Slit Eyes. So I did that a long time ago and I don't do it that much, but the whole process of that song was to overemphasize. I may have overdone it in that particular track, but the idea is to, just create all those little tiny segments, take any audio recording, cut out a small portion, and then go crazy with it, like process it, add effects and then convert it to audio and then chop it up again. And I do a lot of, I make use of the transpose, volume, reverse, and also when you turn on warp, you have all these different modes here. You can play around with the formants and envelopes. It's great for, creating customized glitchy sound. There are a lot of third-party plugins now you can use to do that, but yeah, it's easier to do it with that. You can check out Isotope makes some nice plugins. Isotope makes some plugins like what is it called? Break Tweaker is really good for drums and for creating glitchy, exponential rhythms. It's already there. I have it. I've never used it, but it is essentially. It's also made, I believe, made in collaboration with BT, who's like the master of IDM glitch music. Another one is so Break Tweaker is mainly for drums. Another one is Stutter Edit, which is more like an audio effect that you can apply on any sound. This also you can see here it's designed by BT. So Stutter Edit you can apply on any particular track and then glitch out like crazy. So these also work pretty well. But I would tend to be careful with plugins like this because you may tend to overdo it. In the end of the day, you always want to think about your composition, the arrangement, if it makes sense. You don't want to overdo things because then it just sounds too messy and it loses that context. Cool. Let me in fact just go ahead over here and see, where is it? Okay, I'm not seeing the questions, comments. Awesome. Wow, a lot of stuff. Cool. I'm just going to wait for a few more minutes. If there aren't any more questions, we can end it here. You can always reach out, Crypto Cipher Academy, if you have any questions about this particular song or any specific production techniques. So like the morphing thing. Sumit is probably he knows all that stuff, so he'll explain that stuff for you. But I'll definitely put a video as well, because some of these long processes where there are many steps involved. If you watch someone do it in front of you once, you might forget when you're trying it yourself. So, but if there's a video, you can always watch it afterwards. There's a question: how do you connect two sections of arrangement? That's a good question, actually. How do I connect? So I'm working on one section, and then I'm working on a separate section, and I want these two to connect. So um, harmony is important there. So the chord progressions, as long as it's in the same key as I mentioned before, that will help. But another thing that helps is in electronic dance music is risers and downlifters and all that stuff. So you can see here specifically in my bridge section, which is very different from the rest of the song. With something soloed. Right, so you can see I have that riser type thing happening here. Just those two bars of the voice is delaying, and you can hear it pan left and right. The riser is doing its thing, it's rising, and then you go into a totally different section. I mean, not totally different, the same chord progression, but the feel is totally different. And back here, like I said, now we're going back to that original section, but it's a different feel. So how do we do that? I just use a pause.
Yeah.
Right, so pauses, risers, work fantastic for stuff like where you have a section that sounds very different from another section. Yeah, so I would say that would be the best way. Musically speaking, there are some chords that you can use that will help you to go into the next section. So let's say usually the fifth. So let's say over here, for example, in verse 1, let's say my starting chord here is a C. So the chord right before, if it was a G, it'll kind of transition well into that C chord. So that's the 5 to 1 in a major scale usually works well, even on a minor scale. So 5 minor going into 1 minor, so G minor going into C minor will kind of work pretty well. So you can make sure your chord progressions have that transition built in. If that doesn't work, then you can make use of these risers and pauses and stuff like that. All right, a few more questions here. When do we say bass and sub bass well mixed? I'm not sure what exactly that means, but maybe you're wondering, like, when do you know if they work well together? And yeah, that can be hard to tell, especially if you're on headphones and your headphones are not producing those low frequencies that well. But let's say here, so I would listen to it in isolation, listen to it individually. So this is just the bass. And if I add the sub bass, is it helping? Is it making it slightly thicker on the low end, or is it not? If it's kind of canceling out the low frequencies, that's kind of bad. You want to watch for that, but you definitely don't want to hear your sub bass in a very obvious way. It just needs to be there. It needs to be felt more, and obviously on headphones you won't really feel it that much. So yeah, it is tricky to know when your sub bass and bass are kind of done. But yeah, what I tend to do is I will monitor in different situations. So I kind of by eye and by ear on headphones or on my home speakers, I'll make sure I'm getting a decent mix. Then I'll listen to on a different system. So I have access to a few places. I'll just play back the song I have access to a room where we have a sub bass. Not a sub bass. What do you call that? Like a subwoofer. So running it through a system like that, you hear those low frequencies, and if it's okay, if it's sounding well, then you kind of know that's good to go. But yeah, that can be a bit tricky. You can address that, kind of go for a decent mix. It's okay if it's a bit subdued, because you can always crank it up or at least increase it a bit, maybe in the mixing or the mastering stage. But you definitely don't want to have too much of it, because that can really become a problem. While programming the rhythm section or beats for a commercial song, how do we make this song rhythmic without using heavy drum sounds all the time? Something other than snares and hi-hats. So how to make the song rhythmic without using drums? So you use other parts. So for example, I would say the song even though it's kind of floaty, it does have a rhythmic vibe in specific places. So what I'll do is I'll mute the drum track. Let's, too many tracks here. Let's scroll down, drums, I'll mute this. So those plucks, that kind of has a rhythm to it, but the vocals very floaty on top of it. But if you listen, so here the rhythm is not so much coming from those vocal edits, but it's coming from the synth, right? So where's the synth? I showed you guys this earlier, the wobble synth. Right, so that's implying a rhythm. Even though I've muted the drums, you can still feel the rhythm. In the instrumental section, so here again it's kind of floaty. I mean, this is kind of a laid back, chill, 67 BPM, very slow song, so it's hard to really hear that. But let's say the bridge here. I guess sidechain compression that you can hear there. I have another synth. I think I didn't talk about this one. It's a very straightforward part like that. So that is being sidechain compressed, because without the sidechain compression, well, that's some modulation. So now without that modulation, without the sidechain compression, it doesn't quite have a rhythm. But yeah, the modulation adds a rhythm, the sidechain compression adds a rhythm, and then everything put together, you get that rhythm, even though we don't have drums here, or we're not listening to it with drums. I mean, for the songs which do not use synth sound, songs that are more towards acoustic arrangements. Yeah, so again, you can do that on an acoustic guitar, right? So if you're playing on an acoustic guitar, you can have rhythm to it. Every instrument has rhythm, even in a cappella. I'll give you an example. So typically you might say a cappella, all voices, oh yeah, that doesn't have, groove or rhythm or such, but it definitely does. A perfect example is Imogen Heap's Hide and Seek. So this is a completely a cappella song. There's just voices. I mean, the voices are synthetically created, but it's just voice. And if you listen to this, so in this song, I hope the audio from this is going into the system. So in this song, you can hear in her phrasing, she has rhythm, right? So every phrase, if we go further in where it's more, like say here maybe. So if you can do that, if you can kind of just clap along or snap your fingers to any song, you know that it has a rhythm, and then you can try and figure out, okay, so how are they doing it? So here it's just from the phrasing of the voice. So that's how you can do it, and you can do that on any instrument. Voice from YouTube is on. Yeah, I think I haven't routed this, but you can check out this track. So that probably sounded weird. The Imogen Heap. Let's see if I can quickly do this here. Look back. Just add Safari. Well, cause you did what you say. That it's all for the best, cause it is what you say. Yeah, so hopefully you heard it this time. So you can hear in her phrasing, she has this particular rhythm, and that, implies your groove. Cool. Let's see. Is that it? Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed this. So this was the track. You guys have access to the session. Feel free to play around with it. If you have any more questions that I did not address in this webinar, feel free to reach out. Sumit can give you my information, or you can ask him. But yeah, this is the song. It was really fun working on it. I usually don't do songs with in Indian lyrics and stuff like that, so it was really fun to work on this particular track. I enjoyed it a lot. The vocal performers are fantastic. They've done a fantastic job on this track. So that makes it a lot easier as well. When you hear a good performance, it kind of inspires you to create better music. All right, I guess we can end it here. Thank you all for attending this session. And yeah, please spread the word for Crypto Cipher Academy. Tell your friends, family, everybody about it. And hopefully we can do more of these sessions in the future.